they do seem to be treating it as a game, as Marvin Rees, the Bristol Mayor, just there said himself. Anyway, one of the consequences of all of this, fiddling whilst Rome is burning, is that we've got a colossal amount of homeless, and many of them have bought vehicles. Some of them are squatting, but there is an increasing number of them getting together, as we saw last week with the eviction up on Gloucester Road of the Pigeon SH1T collective up there, and a group called Right to Reside, which is forming around, and another one, I think it's called RAT, which we're about to hear about, in London, protesting austerity-led homelessness and campaigning to stop the new Tory anti-trespass law. There's going to be a day of action on Tuesday, the 23rd of March. That's just this coming Tuesday. And it's part of pro-Israel Home Secretary Priti Patel's police crime sentencing and courts bill. And it's been rolled into that. So this whole business of trespassing was going to be a separate bill to be separately debated, but they decided to just cut and paste it into a much wider anti-protest bill, changing the sentencing and the courts. And, of course, the courts are already on their knees with a massive, massive backlog. Interesting that they say that there's no problem with money, except they can't pay for justice. This is this gangster terminology. This is another thing that's, just going back to the Bristol story, is this whole idea of someone's got a vendetta against the mayor. This is gangster language. Actually, these people have tried to stick with the mayor as long as they can until they've been bullied out, and there's 4 of them now. So anyway, Priti Patel's police crime sentencing and courts bill will criminalise hundreds of thousands of travellers and other homeless people. This includes gypsies, obviously, as well, across the UK this year, if it's passed. The law is also set to ban protests. So there's a protest against this every Saturday now, starting tomorrow until the government backs down at College Green in Bristol. I think it starts at noon, but I'm not absolutely sure about that. Anyway, some groups are saying that we're going to be protesting against this law until it finishes, until it's voted down on College Green every Saturday. But what they're doing, Martin, though, of course, is turning hundreds of thousands of Britain's poorest into criminals. Do you think Priti Patel will get her civil war? Because that's what she seems to want.
Well, it's very provocative, isn't it? And, of course, she's bringing it through now while COVID restrictions are still in place, so that the police, for example, can say, normally we'd accept a protest like this, but because of COVID restrictions, we won't. They're basically making permanent COVID restrictions going forward in a situation where people can't protest against those restrictions because of the lockdown.
It does rather make you think that you could be right in you talking about, this whole idea of a police state being ushered in under the cover of the lockdowns.
Well, I don't think it's just the lockdown is the lockdown. It's a separate issue. But the idea that there is a police state, I've been reading this week about further revelations from the inquiry into the spy cops whatever it is. And of course,
crimes. These were crimes.
Yes, it is. Basically, we have had in this country for many years, effectively, a political Stasi. If you've ever been involved in any political campaigning of any kind, you can be quite certain that you have probably run into undercover police officers who've been gathering information about you, and also possibly leading to situations where you've been denied work, or you've found yourself in other discriminated against in other ways. And also, of course, they formed relationships with numbers of people and had children with them, all of which is totally illegal, but they've done it.
Getting between the sheets with people who haven't even necessarily committed any crime at all.
Well, the fact is that they didn't bother to infiltrate major drug gangs or terrorist groups. We're talking about what are essentially legitimate political protest groups have been completely, the state's been all over them with taxpayer money, of course.
Now, we've had stuff about this in previous weeks. We were looking at the whole blacklisting issue, the idea that there are these databases of people we don't like, rather like the Chinese social credit system, where they have a basically profile of all their population, of the goodies and the baddies, and the people that have got minds of their own get put on the baddies list and bullied and lose their jobs, possibly get arrested, possibly get their homes infiltrated, their lives hacked by police spies, etc. But what have you been finding out about this spy cops issue this week, Martin?
Well, it's coming out in dribs and drabs. And of course, this whole inquiry would never have taken place if activists themselves hadn't uncovered Mark Kennedy. And then the Guardian journalists picked up on it and started chasing it up. And eventually they've been forced to put this inquiry in place. But this inquiry has already basically said it's not really going to look into all of the details of everything that went on. The inquiry is being used as a cover-up, effectively. But on the other hand, even the tiny details that are leaking out are absolutely shocking to those who imagine that they live in a democracy in this country, because they targeted overwhelmingly what you might call the progressive left wing in politics. There was some minimal infiltration of right wing groups and no infiltration at all of criminal groups. They didn't even bother looking after people who were bringing large amounts of drugs into the country or trying to smuggle weapons. They don't use undercover stuff for that. This is all completely directed. It's a political police operating at a political level. And the thing that came out this week is that the special demonstration squad based in the Met was actually under the orders of MI5. So all of this was basically MI5 using police officers as the foot soldiers.
Fascinating. Well, I wonder if these, this is the problem, of course, we're having a half-cock inquiry, which is what they love to do, is that these individuals within the security services, within special branch, well, maybe too, well, certainly within the special demonstration squad, or whatever they've renamed it to now, could still well be operating with these present groups, people like Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, the groups I was just telling you about, the is it RAT, the London group, the Right to Reside group, Antifa. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, the groups which are promoting violence against women, this could all still be happening, couldn't it?
Well, I think it almost certainly is still happening. And of course, it couldn't be clearer, because the government has just passed bills which are going to become law with their 80-seat majority on 43% of the vote, which are going to make any illegal action by the security services, by the police, by the military, as beyond punishment.
Okay, so what you're saying is that rather than just sleeping with activists, these agents might well be able to kill them with impunity.
Well, in Northern Ireland, lots of people have been killed with impunity. No doubt about it. The bombs in Dublin and Monaghan in 1972, the explosives were supplied by British intelligence, killed 27 people. Has anybody been prosecuted? No, they haven't. Will they be? No, they won't. That's the democracy we live in.
Anyway, so lots of these groups are springing up as these more draconian laws chug through. It'd be very interesting to see what the police's take is on all of this, as to whether they decide they want to try and clamp down hard on these various protest movements, or whether they see it as a little bit more nuanced than that, where they will only stop demonstrations where there is violence, etc., because there was obviously no real excuse, Martin, for the police to wade in on the vigil taking place against a police officer, really to, at least alleged, anyway, police officer is alleged to have killed Sarah Everard, and the police decide to weigh in mob-handed last Saturday night. There's been a bit of a backlash against that. But, where do you draw the line when it comes to what you police and what you don't? A vigil, I don't think I've ever seen in this country police weighing into vigils before.
Well, obviously they would claim that it's because of the COVID restrictions, etc. But I understand that the local police in Clapham had come to an arrangement with the protesters about what was going to happen. And then they were overruled from the top. Well, and it looks like Priti Patel.
There was a discussion in court about it, and the court judge decided that this was going to be an illegal demonstration or illegal vigil, and therefore that if anyone turned up as marshals to try and make sure everyone was safe, socially distanced, had masks and things like that, that they could be charged with organising a demonstration, potentially arrested, and potentially fined up to £10,000 for just being there. So it was obvious that things were going to start to go wrong from that judge's decision from that point on, where there is a demonstration that's been organised, a vigil that's been organised. Loads of people are obviously deciding to go, and at the last minute on the radio they're told, oh, this is cancelled now. But lots of people, of course, did turn up, but there was actually no organisation of it whatsoever. It seems to me that the whole thing was a setup, that this judge was actually... he knew, he must have known, or she must have known, that he was going to cause absolute chaos trying to close this demonstration down at the last minute.
Well, in Birmingham, there was a vigil, which was arranged by word of mouth with the police. It took place, it lasted an hour, and everybody went home and nobody was arrested.
Same in Bristol, yeah.
So, in other words, what we've got is a very inconsistent system, which very much depends upon who's in charge on the day and what they think or don't think is right. It reminds me of when we were actually outside Downing Street when George Bush came to visit Tony Blair, and we were all standing behind barriers outside Downing Street, and this one guy started going mad and throwing the barrier around and trying to egg everybody on to try and storm Downing Street. I was standing not very far away from where this was happening, and most people were just, a bit taken aback by what was happening. And then somebody standing next to me pointed and said, I know who that is. That is a police inspector, because I met him at a party on Saturday night. And they said, I know his name. He told me his name. And in actual fact, there was a formal complaint made by Stop the War to the police about that. And it did transpire that the guy who was trying to start a riot was, in fact, a police inspector in North London. And he was there as an agent provocateur. Now, to my mind, that should have been the end of his police career. But it wasn't.
Yeah, well, absolutely right. The most extraordinary thing about the Clapham Common vigil was the turning up of the the Duchess of Cambridge. I think she did a pretty good job there, just laid some flowers, had a chat with some of the people, stayed for about half an hour, and then went off before it got dark. Of course, things then started to kick off afterwards, Martin, and the big irony here, it's a horrendous irony, isn't it, that here is a vigil held for a woman who's allegedly been killed by a diplomatic and royal protection officer, murdered by him, and actually it may even be that Kate Middleton may have even known the face of this guy. This is the sort of guy that would be protecting diplomats and possibly royals too.
Well, I think what it does is it dramatises quite openly, doesn't it, all the issues that we're talking about here. I mean, Kate Middleton, or Windsor as she now is, came along because it's a widely supported protest. Lots of people understand why it's there. To my mind, what the Met Police should have done there, they should have talked to the protest organisers and tried to arrange that it was done according to COVID regs, and then everybody could have had their protest and gone home, and that would have been the end of it.
Yeah, well,
but instead, of course, it's dramatised.
Martin, that was never going to happen.
About the way things are going.
That was never going to happen from the moment that the organisers were threatened with arrest and massive fines.
No, but I mean, don't forget that, for example, last year in Bristol, we had the protest which ended up with Colston in the dock, literally in the dock in the harbour. And of course, in this bill that Priti Patel's put forward, you can get 10 years for doing that. Apparently, you don't get 10 years for rape, but you get 10 years for defacing a statue. And this, of course, is all part of culture wars. The local elections are coming up, and the right wing of the Tory party is trying to whip up what is essentially a crypto-fascist culture war against all the people they don't like. Protesters,
crypto-fascist,
whoever.
Trying to out crypto-fascist the Labour Party.
Well, the Labour Party are lamely going along with the Tory strategy, because Keir Starmer believes that it is his role to win back the red wall voters who voted for Johnson at the last election, because he still thinks that he can win under first past the post, which he can't. And his whole strategy has basically been wrong, in my view. What he should be doing is reaching out to other progressive forces, not bending over backwards to keep some fairly reactionary people happy.
Okay, well,
you're never going to vote Labour anyway.
The other interesting aspect of the Wayne Couzens alleged murder by Wayne Couzens of Sarah Everard is there's this guy who's his boss, Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, much loved by MI5. Apparently MI5 it was that got him the job as the anti-terror boss. He's still not been on TV explaining how one of his officers became a potential murderer, Martin. Now, these are the people who are supposed to be protecting us against terrorists.
Well, I don't think we can make two... I mean, the fact that an individual police officer has got tendencies which lead him to carry out sexual murder... that you can't really protect. You know, people are like that.
Let's just be careful here, because it's all very alleged.
That's right, and he's not even been convicted.
The other alleged thing is that apparently he exposed himself at a kebab shop 3 days previous to Sarah's abduction, allegedly, if it's the same person, and we just don't know. It certainly looks like that. And nothing was done about it. So they had CCTV, they reported it to the police, etc., and nothing happened. I mean, surely the guy should have been just arrested straight away, even if he was a police officer.
Yeah, one would have thought so. But of course, as you well know, Tony, I mean, people exposing themselves is not uncommon. Lots of people do it, and it doesn't necessarily end up in court immediately. But if the fact that he was a police officer, I think they should have picked up on that.
Well, yeah, I would have thought so. He was, that would have meant if the police had done their job on that occasion, it would have meant that he would certainly have not had any access to firearms. He would have had his warrant card taken away, because there's also an accusation that he used his warrant card to gain the confidence of Sarah. That's only allegedly.
Yes, and I think, you know, it may be just that they messed up, that they didn't look at the CCTV in time or whatever, but really that does raise questions about how professional they are. If a police officer exposes himself in a fast food shop, his feet shouldn't touch the floor, should they?
I wouldn't have thought so. Yeah, he should be fast in the Black Mariah.
I suppose if he'd done it in uniform, then they really would have had to arrest him. I presume he didn't do it in uniform. Well, but nevertheless, you'd have thought they should have pretty quickly worked out what it was.
We can't presume he did it, and we certainly can't presume he did it in or out of uniform. We just don't know. Or if he did it at all. So I think on the positive side of all this, I think one of the most amazing things is that Priti Patel seems to be succeeding in bringing all these different protest groups together that she's trying to ban. You know, we're talking about Extinction Rebellion. We're talking about the massive anti-lockdown demonstrations. We're talking about Black Lives Matter, and now we're talking about Antifa too, and this kind of new group really, which is coming up around. I mean, although they've always been there, around the right to reside, stopping people, basically the idea of criminalising travellers, which, by the way, is against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as is the idea of banning protests, also against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It seems that Priti Patel, sitting in her office at the Home Office, just crossing off various of the articles in the Charter of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So anyway, next Tuesday there is going to be some sort of a protest around the country. Certainly London seems to be one of the places where it's happening. And people are protesting against this whole idea of criminalising the homeless, criminalising the poor, criminalising travellers and gypsies. And I spoke earlier this week to someone from the Bristol's Right to Reside group called Dara.
Hi, so I'm Dara, and these new laws have proposed to change trespass from a civil offence to a criminal offence. And what they're doing is they're not just changing the law of trespass from a civil to a criminal offence. They've specified that this is trespass with the intent to reside, and they've aimed this at traveller communities, intent to reside with one or more vehicles. And I think it's really important that people start talking about how these laws aren't in place to protect landowners. There's already plenty of laws in place to protect landowners. These laws are in place to stop protests and to stop travelling communities, or Roma Gypsy and traveller communities, from living their lifestyles. There's been a whole plethora of laws throughout history to try and quieten these minority voices and their ways of life, and this is the sort of final straw to that, I guess. You know,
there's only a few people live in vehicles, very few this is going to affect. Surely this is more to do with, I mean, when people think about trespassing, they're thinking about maybe straying off a footpath on a country walk.
Yeah, but what they've specified in this is about people in vehicles. The law officially states that this is trespass with the intent to reside in a vehicle will be criminalised. They've even put out a statement saying that wild campers and roamers won't be persecuted in this. Priti Patel has squeezed these laws. So the trespass laws originally, the intent to criminalise trespass was not part of this courts and sentencing bill that Priti Patel is putting forward. It was a separate matter. There was Nick Hayes and the Right to Roam organisation made a petition which got enough signatures for the criminalisation of trespass to be debated in court. But they've managed to sneakily, pushed it back because of coronavirus. Delayed, that's the word. They've delayed the debate on it so much that now they've managed to just sneak it through as part of this bill, when before it was actually separate, and now they're not even going to debate it in reference to this petition and all of these voices saying we do not agree with this, we do not agree with the criminalisation of trespass. In the last MP letter that was written to MPs, their response to it was basically saying that the public will disrupt land, the public will pollute land, and if we just give open access to people to our green spaces, it will be destroyed. And our reaction to this is we already have corporations and businesses abusing our wild spaces. We don't have access to these spaces. If you give people domain over space, they will look after it. And right now our British countryside is already being abused, and it has no, the people are not affecting this, it's the corporations doing this. I mean, you can sort of see this bill as an extension to the Criminal Justice and Public Order Bill and what Thatcher did, and she ruined the housing market. None of us had anywhere to live, and I mean, a lot of our parents, especially the new traveller scene, we've all grown up in this new traveller generation, but our parents were forced out of civilised society to live in vans and vehicles because they couldn't afford housing, and we still can't afford housing. I think they will succeed in getting this bill passed, unfortunately, but hopefully get the message out, get public understanding of how these laws are actually a direct attack on traveller, roaming and gypsy communities. This isn't about landlords. Just sort of change the rhetoric around this law in the public eye, I think, is the most important thing now, so we can get more of a backing and more of a resistance against this. It's absolutely insane. The idea that you can make someone a trespass just by existing in a space is just insane and really horrible to think about, really, but, that's where we've got to. We've got RAT in London, which is Resisting Anti-Trespass London. I believe they're trying to stir some stuff up for the 23rd. There's a whole group of independents in Bristol trying to get something together and try and get the word out about these laws. I guess it's all a bit decentralised and lots of individuals working in small groups, not wanting to be named, but also wanting to be able to protest. Because also, part of this bill is the criminalisation of protest itself, or any protest that causes disruption, which is a massive issue because the whole point of protest is generally to cause disruption and air our grievances. But if we can only do that in a regulated set time and set place, we're not really protesting at all, are we?
Well, that's Dara there from Right to Reside in Bristol, Martin. Lovely to hear these youngsters kind of getting into, I suppose, what we were doing and when we were at their age too, which is saying, look, we're not having this, effectively. The end of the megaphone, that's another thing which is part of this. Apparently, if you've got a megaphone, it's going to have to be turned right down at a demonstration, otherwise you will be instantly arrested and you will become a criminal.
Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because I remember a few years ago now, we had a protest outside a conference which had been organised by BAE Systems about drones. And this was when drones were just coming into public consciousness as being used for assassinations and murders in foreign countries. Anyway, we turned up outside the place in the centre of Bristol where they were having this conference in the conference centre. And the police talked to us about what we wanted to do. We said we want to have a protest. Said, OK, you can come and protest. They put us outside. And we had lots of really noisy protesters. Well, there was Rita Lynch's band. There was a sound system. And there was lots of people banging pots and pans. And as a result of the noise that we were making, they had to cancel the conference. And it was shown on ITV West. It was shown of all these people just scurrying out of the back door and being sent off. And they'd come from all over the world. They had to take them off and put them on planes and send them all the way back. And the police took the line at that stage that they were complaining like mad, saying we can't have our conference in here. They're too noisy. And the police were saying, well, there's no law about being noisy on demonstrations. And if you think about it, it's quite extraordinary that the police can decide how much noise you can make on a demonstration. The whole point of demonstrations often is for people to shout and chant and all the rest of it.
Well, yeah,
are the police going to be able to say you can't do that?
Attract the attention of the public around so they can come and pick up a leaflet and find out what it's all about, that sort of thing. I mean, it seems to me that there's an attempt to get the entire national narrative either happening on the floor of the House of Commons or on the supine national media, things like Question Time, which is like, you know, watching paint dry these days. There's a total attempt to shut public discussion down about a whole load of issues, and in fact many issues that don't even get talked about at all, like this actually riding a coach and horses through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yes, and at the same time, you've got the right wing of the Tory party going on about the woke mobs who are trying to silence the voices of people who disagree with them, etc. I mean, basically, they are total hypocrites. They want to be the only people whose voices are heard, and anybody else who speaks out of line from their point of view is going to be criminalised. Now, you can go down that road, and of course the gerrymandering they're going to carry through is another straw in the wind, and preventing people from voting unless they've got photo ID. This sounds very like Northern Ireland before 1969. And of course that ended up with 2 Tory prime ministers nearly murdered and ultimately a peace agreement. Priti Patel is playing with fire.
Yes, she is. Extinction Rebellion have accused the Tories of trying to create an authoritarian police state.
Well, I mean, they're quite right, aren't they? I mean, basically, the right to protest and have a say is fundamental. And if you haven't got it, how can you win over people to your point of view? And of course, what they're doing on every level is trying to create what is effectively a one-party Tory state, specifically in England. Because, of course, the Scots, we were talking earlier about the right to roam. In Scotland, people have had the right to roam over any part of the land for many years because it was passed through the Scottish Parliament as one of the causes that John Smith, former Labour leader, held dear to his heart. And you can see the political culture of Scotland and England diverging on this. And of course, in Northern Ireland, they wouldn't dare to try and produce this kind of stuff because it's too explosive. You can't mess around with this kind of thing because ultimately, if you force people out of the political system, they'll find some way to kick their way back in.
There's an article by Michael East about it's to do with, you know, whether or not the police are part of the problem or part of the solution, really. It's the headline is, "The problem with police criminality in the UK is much bigger than you think. A list of crimes committed by serving police officers between 2009 and 2021 is absolutely horrific," he says. And he points to a database which has been put together of these various police crimes. The first page of the document, he says, already brings us our first allegation of murder, with PC Time Bremer accused of killing his lover. Despite admitting he strangled her, he was found not guilty of murder. It is one of 12 counts of homicide since 2009, with the killing of Sarah Everard not even included. 10 of these murders are of women, 2 are of black men, and 9 victims were the police officer's wife or girlfriend. 1 was his daughter. I think we've got a bit of a problem in the police, Martin, that needs clearing up here. Rather than, you know, putting all men in the country on curfew, they should just go through the police officers already there and make sure they don't have any murderers or potential murderers in their midst.
Well, as you will remember, a part of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland was the disbanding of the Royal Ulster Constabulary as a sectarian police force and its reconstitution as the police service of Northern Ireland, which was going to be independent of political pressure from loyalists or from the British government. And don't forget, many RUC men and women were actually casualties of the war. They were also, of course, involved in setting up murders of people they didn't like Pat Finucane. You know, Priti Patel, her family came here from Uganda in the 1970s. And this authoritarianism that she seems to be very keen on has got the potential to plunge mainland Britain into what the people of Northern Ireland went through for 30 years. And if she thinks, for example, if we're going to have mass unemployment, which we quite likely are this year, next year, and you're going to have lots of military-age males hanging around with no money, the potential for extreme violence is very much there, especially if the police become a distrusted enemy force in inner city areas.
Well, we had, didn't we, a piece a couple of months ago on the Clydach murders in South Wales, one of the most horrific murder cases in recent Welsh history. I think it was 1999 it happened, where there were 3 murders of various different generations. Midnight on the Saturday, extreme violence was unleashed on Mandy Power, her 80-year-old mother Doris, and Mandy's children, Katie, aged 10, and Emily, aged 8. All 4 were beaten to death. And the embarrassing part of that is that many people are pinning this actually on a police officer and that was involved with the family, that Di Morris, or David Morris, has been serving a life sentence, later reduced to 32 years. So he's still in jail. He could have been released by now, Di Morris, but he said, I'm not going to say I was guilty and then get it out early. He won't do that, and he's going to carry on fighting for his release. So, you know, if in South Wales the most horrific murder of recent years, as it looks like, was actually carried out by the police, Martin, we've absolutely got to have some sort of accountability so that the decent police who are now serving, I feel a little bit like it's a bit like journalism, actually, where decent journalists have to be backed up, whilst the dodgy ones, the ones who are lying, and the criminal police officers have got to be rooted out. Is it ever going to happen?
Well, this has been there's always going to be a tension about this, because the police do have extensive powers and they're open to abuse. I mean, the West Midlands police force was ultimately disbanded and reconstituted as the West Mercia Police, because they had a reputation for just beating people up in custody and fitting them up, including the Birmingham Six. And, there's always been tension about this. I lived in Brixton during the early 1980s. And frankly, the police at that stage were completely unprofessional. Both of the riots were largely caused by the unprofessional behaviour of the police. And the danger is that if unprofessional behaviour by the police is given encouragement, like that inspector that I spoke about earlier, who was trying to foment a riot, that's what he was trying to do. If those people aren't punished, then the whole thing becomes very, very out of control very, very quickly. And if people don't think that they could have, major riots in this country with lots of people killed, as we see in the United States of America, if they can't see that that can happen here, then they haven't got enough imagination. It's quite possible that we could go down that road. If you've got a very, very hardline Tory government, as we now have, mass unemployment, and there is going to be a potential flare-up, and of course, if the police are perceived to be the heavy hand of that Tory government by a younger generation, then the possibilities for extreme violence are definitely there.
Well, anyway, RAT, which is Resist Anti-Trespass, and the Right to Reside group, etc., are very new groups, and so what I'll do is I'll put a link up on our show page at thisweek.org.uk if you're interested in seeing what they're up to. More power to their elbow, I say. The idea that you don't resist an authoritarian clampdown is just a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. So that's it for the first part, Martin. We're going to be looking at the extraordinary events with the withdrawal of the Russian ambassador from Washington. I was looking out for it on the news last night. Apparently it wasn't news. This is the first time this has happened, and it's absolutely extraordinary. But this is a bit embarrassing, isn't it, for the elites, that it looks like there may be a war looming with Russia, but they don't want to talk about it. And that's the way the mass media operates nowadays. So thanks to Irish Republican Labour activist Martin Summers for the first hour. Join us in a minute as we take our weekly look around the world.